Today on the MrMaple Show podcast, Matt and Tim talk to legend plant breeder, Dr. Tom Ranney.
Good morning and welcome to the MrMaple podcast. Today, guys, we've got a really special podcast for you with Dr. Tom Ranney of the Mountain Horticulture Research Station here in Mills River, North Carolina.
Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate you being here. It's fun to visit our neighbors sometimes. One of the jokes that we talk about doing this podcast is it gives us an excuse to catch up with our friends. So it gives us a good excuse to drop by. I mean, we're only like 20 minutes away, so it's ridiculous. We have to make an excuse, but it's good to get out here.
Yeah, it's great to have you guys. And yeah, you're right. It is funny that I think I run into both of you more at conferences and in random people's gardens around the country more than I see you in Western North Carolina.
I remember we spent some time one year just randomly. We ran to the Cox Arboretum.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Tom Cox. That was a phenomenal place.
One podcast we were really proud of is we got to go down and do one with Tom before he passed. It was a lot of fun. Just kind of pick his brain about conifers, and his grandsons are doing a great job with that garden. We went and visited. They had a memorial for him this year, and we went down. They're really keeping the garden up, keeping things going there. It looks pretty cool.
Well, that's great to hear. It was a pretty impressive private arboretum, so it's nice that they're able to maintain that.
Now, Dr. Tom Ranney, how many plant introductions have y'all introduced here at the Research Center?
Well, I think officially it's in the 60s, so we're around 64, 65.
Wow.
And so what that doesn't reflect is how many projects that we worked on that were complete failures. So plant breeding is sort of a numbers game, and it takes a lot of work, and some of these projects we've been working on for well over 20 years. So that represents a pretty concerted effort, but we work on a pretty broad diversity of plants. I think at any one time, we're probably working on 40 different genera of plants. So we have an awesome team with John Nix, Nathan Lynch, Irene Palmer, and Andrew Nuss, who lead a lot of the specific projects.
Mm-hmm.
So.
See, but I like to think of those ones, the 64 you claim, those are like number ones on the Hot 100 charts there. Those are like hits.
Yeah, some of them have been quite successful, so we're real proud of that. But it's a lot of fun. We really enjoy this space kind of bridging academia and research and development and product development and working with nurseries like you guys.
So your recent introduction, you've got a Catalpa right now that's making headlines right now in the nursery industry.
Yes, exactly. In fact, I just got nursery and landscape notes today in my mailbox, and one of the Catalpas is on the cover. So
my dad showed me that before I got here.
Oh, really? So interesting plant. Catalpa is kind of a rare and unusual intergeneric hybrid. It's a hybrid between Chalopsis and Catalpa, and the cross was actually done first in Uzbekistan in the 60s. And they introduced a couple of cultivars that made their way to the United States, Pink Dawn and Morning Cloud. And they never really picked up and got a lot of traction in the nursery industry. But we wanted to see if we could step it up a little bit and make some improvements. And actually, this is a project that Richard Olson, who is now the director of the U.S. National Arboretum, worked on when he was a graduate student here.
Oh, pretty cool.
And so we've just released El Nino. Spring Meadow has given it a common name of desert orchid. And this is a cross that actually dates back to Richard's time when he was a graduate student here.
Oh, that's cool.
But if you guys have time after the podcast, I'd love to take you out in the field and show you one that's in full bloom right now.
I will hands down take you up on that. That's really cool. Good friends with Dr. Richard Olson as well, so that's cool, the lineage of that. We're going to bug him and go up to the National Arboretum and do a pod with him at some point. So
great.
We like to pick his brain for maples a little bit, get in some of those older succession numbers there at the National Arboretum. Sometimes we did a thing with him a couple years ago where we went and bugged him for trees that they have in the National Arboretum's archives that are no longer in the nursery trade. So it was kind of a fun little project to kind of get some soundwood on stuff that's kind of disappeared.
Right. Well, it's fun to go up there and poke around and see some of the original material that breeders like eGolf were working on. And,
Wow. Yeah.
There's definitely a historical element to it.
You've got some great alumni from here now. I mean, you mentioned Richard Olson. There's I think a lot of the great minds in horticulture have probably come through and studied with you or under you here. It's pretty impressive, the alumni you have from this place here in Fletcher, North Carolina. That maybe people in the state might not even know how special this place is.
Well, I think that's something we're most proud of. We talk about plants a lot, but I think the thing that we really appreciate and are most proud of are the students that have come through here. We've got an active graduate, undergraduate program. We bring in interns. Many of them go on to graduate school, and they've found careers really around the country in botanic gardens and nurseries and academia. So it's fun to see.
We actually have a number of people that have done internships here that have also worked at Mr. So we're definitely taking advantage of having, this nearby.
Yeah, and maybe Plant Delights and maybe the Ralston Arboretum.
Right.
They tend to spin around.
They got it going on, man. It's fun to see, and I think there's so much great horticulture going on in North Carolina in general. I think it's really a hotbed. It's really cool to see, and it's in big part and thanks to NC State and your efforts here. But it's really cool that there's that many. I mean, you go to plant breeders, anywhere. You go to Oregon, you go talk to the top plant breeder at some of the places around. It's like, well, yeah, I was in Fletcher. I know where you're from. Did you ever go to El Paso? Everybody's like, it's funny how many people, have spent some time here.
Now, to bring this into relevancy for many people who are listening, many of y'all also shop on Mr. Maple, and we mail order Japanese maples all across the country. But recently, we just listed a lot of Carolina Sweethearts, and they sold out. That's a Cerces canadensis redbud that was developed here by Dr. Tom Ranney. Dr. Ranney, what do you like about Carolina Sweetheart, and how was this tree kind of developed here?
So, NC State has a reputation and a history of doing a lot of redbud breeding, and Dr. Denny Werner has done a lot, and Dr. Shun Chen now is picking up that mantle. We were interested in seeing if we could combine a number of different traits in Carolina Sweetheart. The variegated trait and the purple foliage trait. And interestingly, both of those are recessive, but they're fairly simply inherited. So if you cross something like forest pansy with silver cloud, you get plants that have just green foliage. But we have read some of Mendel's work and knew about recessive traits, so we did do an F2 generation. And they would segregate for purple foliage, variegated foliage, and a certain percentage, about 1 out of 16, would have both.
Wow.
So Carolina Sweetheart is kind of unique in that there's a time of year in the spring when it's actively growing that you can get bright pink new leaves in combination with variegation. So it's pretty unique. And when it's at its prime, it's a spectacular plant.
Probably my favorite redbud of them all. I'm just going to be clear. Now, my oldest daughter is named Carolina, so I might have a special. But it's a perfect pairing of a great name and a perfect plant, and I don't think the market's ever even caught up to the demand on this one. It's a phenomenal plant.
And that was part of a partnership with the North Carolina Nursery and Landscape Association, plant that we worked with them on. So.
Yeah, Carolina Sweetheart. It's one of those plants that is interesting. You talked about Mendel's work. I've actually been studying some of his stuff because I'm actually starting to breed some axolotls.
Oh, geez.
And the same laws apply.
Hold on. Here's where Tim sabotages the whole podcast and talk about lizards and frogs and axolotls.
But it's just a fun, interesting thing to understand this breeding concept. I've never really done much with Japanese maples and breeding because sometimes they self and their flowers are so small. It's the end very complicated, and I've just sort of passed that off myself in the past. But with me looking at the axolotls, it's like, yeah, the Mendel's work. It's interesting you study the same thing with Carolina Sweetheart. I've always heard that F2 generation is where plants are really found, because that's when you've started to breed and find the traits you're really looking for. That's where you see a lot of those traits. Were there a lot of other sister seedlings that you sort of just culled because Carolina Sweetheart was the best?
There were, and actually, I'm sure you're familiar with the Neubauers. We actually sent some of our top selections out to them to see how they did in a production situation, and they were actually the ones that made the final pick and decision on Carolina Sweetheart.
Very cool. That's a absolute home run. I love that one.
But yeah, you were talking about breeding. You know, if I had more time, I'd love to get into dog breeding and breeding koi and really expand the horizons.
Koi gets into the whole bloodlines of the. I mean, you get the whole crazy stuff there.
It's fascinating.
We'll start selling plants like they do koi. We'll be like, but this parent was in this one castle in Japan.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a whole different marketing scheme. You're selling individuals.
So. When you're going through and you've got this development for different plants, you have goals that you're looking for. And when you're finding those goals, you're like, okay, this one checks off what we're looking for. What happens to the plants that, don't make those goals, but may have something else interesting? Do they get further evaluated, or do they just sort of sometimes get thrown to the side?
A little bit of both, but that is interesting. So like you said, on pretty much all of our projects, we've got a list of objectives and priorities that we're shooting for. And we often know a little bit about the genetics and the heritability of those traits, and we can work on that. But every time you do a cross, it is sort of a genetic roll of the dice. And so oftentimes you come up with things completely unexpected. There's an old adage in plant breeding that exceptional offspring can come from very unexceptional parents. And this is a concept that my children cling to. So there is a serendipity factor, right? And so you do crosses, you think you're going towards your objectives, and every once in a while something will show up completely unexpected. And sometimes you've got to think outside the box, and that oftentimes I'll have blinders on and I'm looking for a certain trait. So we often try and involve a number of people in evaluating populations and winnowing things down, and different people are attracted to different traits. Some people might be looking for the really dwarf compacted plant when we were looking for a weeping one. And so every once in a while we do find surprises.
One surprise I think you were talking to me about earlier before this podcast was your Spirea japonica candy corn.
Exactly. That's a good example. So on the Spirea program, that is part of our breeding work to develop non-invasive nursery crops. There are some plants that are very important commercially. They've got good utility, but they're just a little weedier than we would like them to be. Spirea is one that falls into that group. And so we were developing triploid Spirea to knock out fertility. And of course, the golden foliage and compact habits are valuable. We grew out big populations. We made a few selections, and we rogued out the rest of them. A couple years later, we got a call from Spring Meadow Nursery, and they said, "Hey, we have one of your Spireas that looks really interesting."
Yeah.
And they appreciated that in the spring, the new growth came out red, sort of candy apple red, and then it transitioned yellow, and they noticed that it didn't burn in the summertime, had a great form, multicolored plant. I mean, you can't beat it with an annual. It's got such good color, and it's been one of our top-selling introductions. So it's a plant we passed over. We missed the value of it and didn't recognize its potential, but luckily other people did.
That's like the B-side. That's the number one, because that's like probably the most sold plant, right?
I think it sold well over 1 million units at this point.
I think I saw some in my sister-in-law's yard. I think I've got one in my yard.
Hey, I know the guy that did that one.
Yeah.
So another big hit was the Invincible Hydrangea series. I know y'all have donated a ton to cancer research through that as well.
Correct. That was a fun project. A native plant. You guys, I'm sure, are quite familiar with it, hiking in the mountains. You see it in these moist coves, and you can have large populations, but it's really rare to find one that has good ornamental traits. Of course, Annabelle was out there. That was found in the wild. And that's pretty much, in terms of flower color, that's pretty much all that existed was white. And so we were challenged to see if we could develop improved forms, expand the color range. And actually, this is another project that dates back to Richard Olson. He was hiking out in the Nantahala Gorge and found a hydrangea arborescens that had a little bit of pink in it. It almost looked like a spirea. And this has been described in botanical literature as forma ex carnea, reflecting the color of raw meat, like carrion, which is not much of a marketing. Sometimes botanists are just a little bit too direct, I guess. But and he called that Wesser Falls after one of the waterfalls in Nantahala. We got that along with a number of other of these carnea forms and started crossing them with Annabelle and other arborescens, and it took a lot of generations to start finding them. I think things like ruby are probably 6 generations of breeding to combine. One thing that growers really wanted were stiff stems, and so that they didn't flop when they would get wet. So it was a process of shrinking them down, getting stiffer stems, enhancing the flower color, and now we have a whole series, and the Invincible series have raised over $1 million for the Breast Cancer Research Foundation.
That's incredible.
So, yeah, we're pretty proud of that.
Now, you talked about a little bit about how this was something that, Dr. Olson found hiking. I know you're an avid outdoorsman as well. Like, you love going outdoors. I'm always seeing some of the best photography and some of the best drone footage that I've ever seen on Facebook, on social media.
I mean, I swear you're like puffins that you took pictures of. That could be National Geographic right there.
Oh.
Like, I don't know if you've done any professional photography for magazines, but that's like some Nat Geo stuff right there for sure.
Well, thanks. That was fun. In Newfoundland, we came across a puffin colony, and I've got like a 600 to 1,000 millimeter lens, and these puffins were landing at my feet. And it was like, they were way too close. They would come in like bowling balls, just hitting the ground, and they roll. They're not real good flyers and not very graceful, but that was fun. Bird photography is sort of a hobby.
That was so interesting. I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they were probably younger. It was probably Carolina, but I was like, "Come here and look at these pictures," and they were enjoying your Facebook post. So,
thanks.
If it's keeping the toddler amused, it's a pretty good post.
Thanks.
So you've traveled to Newfoundland. You've traveled to Thailand. You've traveled all around the world when it comes to just travel. You've seen a lot of the world. For those that enjoy gardening like you do, is there any particular places that you'd recommend people go and visit and actually see whenever it comes to maybe some of the best gardens or some of the best flora that you've seen in the world?
That's sort of a loaded question, and I think I might put it in a couple categories. Certainly gardens. Whenever we travel, we are always stopping in and visiting gardens. In fact, our kids used to joke about it. Like, if I would say, "Hey, I want to go a certain place," they would say, "Which garden is there?" And they were on to me. But they did come to appreciate plants and gardening, and and the other thing I like about traveling in horticulture is there's always a connection. You can always find kindred spirits. Right. With gardeners, we were just out in the state of Washington for the American Rhododendron Society meeting. Lots of tours of private gardens, and they were spectacular. And the people are so knowledgeable, so friendly, showing off gardens that they've worked on for 50 years. And so we just sort of incorporate that in our traveling. We do like hiking in the wilds as well, and going to environments like Patagonia, where the flora is just completely different, is really intriguing to me. And we're always on the lookout for interesting plants too, visiting gardens and nurseries. I know both of you have been to Japan a number of times, but new plants is sort of the raw material for us in plant breeding, and we do work a lot with other people that travel much more extensively than we do, people like Scott McMahon and Mark Wethington and Dan Hinckley, and people even just down the road like Dick Figler, who's a world authority on magnolias. Those connections are extremely important for us for getting new material that's valuable for breeding.
It's so fun. It's like the world's a small place, and then when you get into horticulture, it's way smaller, right? You get into horticulture and you walk into a garden center in Japan and you find a common interest with somebody right away. It's amazing how how small the world gets when you're into plants.
I think people who are gardeners are just inherently good people.
I agree. It's funny.
They nurture plants.
It's a common language that you can speak with so many different people from so many different walks of life all over the planet. It's like you get this crazy thing like I get it. Now we're like 8-year-olds being buddies again. Like it's like you met a friend. So the most basic question we always like to ask on this podcast, but I got to ask it. How did you get into horticulture? What inspired your love and this lifelong career you've had in developing amazing plants?
It's hard for me to put my finger on, one incident or one thing that influenced me, but it is funny. Coincidentally, I was thinking about this the other day and shared a story with my wife, Amira, a story that she had not heard before. That when I was a young kid, I was about 5 years old. I was out exploring in our area. We lived in the country, and so I spent a lot of time in the woods hiking. And at 5, I stumbled upon this field of daffodils in full bloom. And I was mesmerized by them. And I collected a big bouquet, and I took them back to my mom, and she was a bit shocked. The field of daffodils actually happened to be our neighbor's front yard. And so she marched me over to the neighbors, and I had to take this bouquet of daffodils back. And the woman was very sweet, and she, of course, insisted that I kept them. She gave me packages of seeds, plant starts, and I went back and started my first garden, probably at 5. But
look what this lady inspired. Oh, my gosh. Let's all find her and send her relatives a thank you card. My gosh.
But I also happened to grow up across the street from the Holden Arboretum in Kirtland Hills, Ohio. And that was sort of my private backyard. They have a lot of natural areas, thousands of acres, and I would hike, camp back there, and was always curious about the trees that they had planted everywhere.
Oh, very cool.
Certainly had lots of influential mentors. I was fortunate to overlap with J.C. Ralston and work with Dick Burr and Frank Blazich and other faculty members here that were great mentors for research and kind of more on the academic side.
Was there a moment where you realized plant breeding specifically was going to be kind of your niche, like that what you were going to really contribute to the horticulture world was the development side of it? Was there a part where maybe even college where you went like, this is where I kind of want to go?
That sort of evolved as well, and I sort of came into horticulture through the back door. My undergraduate degree was in wildlife management, and thus puffin pictures.
Right.
And at one point, I thought I wanted to be an ornithologist. And when I graduated from undergraduate from the Ohio State University, there weren't a lot of opportunities in wildlife management, but I had an employable skill. I knew how to use a rope and saddle and climb trees. And so I worked as an arborist, and then eventually wanted just to sort of legitimize my career in horticulture. Went to Cornell to get a degree in horticulture and sort of fell in love with research.
Wow.
My graduate work focused more on stress physiology, and it wasn't until I began working here that I sort of transitioned more into the plant breeding and crop improvement side of it.
How long have you been here now? Is that a bad question to ask?
No. So I started here in '89, so that puts it at, 35 years?
It's pretty impressive.
So it's kind of shocking to think about, right?
It's incredible is what it is. It's
So, but no, I still come in 7 days a week and love checking on things and what we're doing and projects. And
that's crazy. I was born in '87.
Really?
So I hear that, I'm like, man, he's been here my entire life.
You got a long career ahead of you.
Get to work, dude. What are you taking Sundays off for? Come on. No, we appreciate what you do. I love it, and I share that passion for just getting out. Like I get down there with a flashlight and go check on the nursery at night because I just want to go see what things look like. So I get the zeal for being in. So many just great plants that we haven't even covered. I mean, we have a whole list that Tim and I made, but there's just so many absolute home runs. I know we've loved Aphrodite. That's something we've offered several times. I think it's been a pretty good hit. The sweet shrub, Calycanthus Aphrodite. I don't know if we mentioned that one, but absolutely love that plant. It's been one that's from here that we've done a few times.
Aphrodite is fun. It's I think it's a spectacular plant. I know Tony Avent gives it rave reviews. What I think is unusual about it that some people don't recognize is how long it blooms. It'll bloom for a good 6 to 8 weeks. So it is a cross between Calycanthus chinensis and Calycanthus occidentalis, a West Coast species. The flowers are held up well above the foliage, but it not only blooms on terminals, but then it'll bloom on the subterminal flower buds. So it just blooms and blooms, and it essentially looks like a magnolia blooming in the summer.
Underused.
It does get big.
Yeah.
It can be quite a large plant, but I think planting it along a woodland edge or below a deck, a place you can look down on it, where it's got a little space to grow, it's a great shrub. Very deer resistant too. They don't mess with it.
Yeah.
And I think Calycanthus venus is a gorgeous specimen too that y'all introduced.
It is fun. Yeah. Venus is good. It's got 3 different species in its pedigree and has a white flower and pretty good fragrance.
And it sort of gets that sort of purple interior part to it. Mm-hmm. I mean, that just grabs my eye when I look at it. I'm like, that's sharp.
Yeah. We are actually starting to do more Calycanthus breeding again. We've sort of taken a break for it. But if we could get some things like Aphrodite, but in a smaller size, it would be really desirable.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's for us. We're always looking at the plants that are extremely ornamental. The woody ornamentals, a lot of our customers have that they pair with their Japanese maples, and there's so many fun plants that we even need to find ways to be able to offer more plants. Like, for instance, your Albizia chocolate fountain. I think that's just a cool plant that a lot of people would enjoy if we could ever, get it in production or get it going in numbers so that we could offer it at Mr. Maple.
Yeah, that would be great. So, propagation is something we've learned some hard lessons with, that being able to propagate things easily is really important for it to be successful. And I actually remember J.C. Ralston talking about that quite a bit. So the Albizia is tough. It doesn't root from cuttings. It doesn't do well in tissue culture. One of the best ways to propagate it is from root cuttings, but it's not very successful. We get, maybe 20% success, and it's sort of slow. You can graft them, but that can be a little problematic as well. We're doing some work breeding Asimina pawpaws right now, and they sort of have the same challenge, that propagation could be really one of the big challenges for mass marketing.
It's tricky with pawpaws. We mutual friend Brian Upchurch kind of taught us how to do some different tricks with those, but they can be quite the puzzle for propagators.
Mm-hmm.
Brian always said that you took the signwood when it's dormant, you let the rootstock flush out, and then later you graft the dormant signwood onto the flushed
like now,
pawpaw.
like almost now.
Yeah,
like maybe a couple weeks ago.
Probably a couple weeks ago, but later in the season, which is crazy because that's exact opposite of the way I'd produce almost any of my other grafted plants.
The sap would just destroy Japanese maple at this stage.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. We've got to twist your arm and get you doing some Japonicum breeding. We need some new Japonicums.
Yeah.
Acer Japonicums.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
We've interviewed Sue Egriff. She did a lot of early research on Acer pseudosboldianum and Seboldianum, and some of those hybrids that are coming out. She kind of helped pave the way for a lot of the more cold tolerant stuff that's out there today. She actually talks about how there's some interesting possibilities of hybrids between Pseudoseboldianum or Seboldianum and Japonicum, where Japonicum may have a more natural barrier to palmatum, and that's why we don't see as much just genetic diversity in it. But if we could kind of go through Seboldianum and Pseudoseboldianum, maybe we could create some more
bridge species.
Right. And now there's pretty heavily variegated Seboldianums. There's weeping Seboldianums. There's some neat things out there. Yeah, maybe
that's an interesting.
Maybe
angle.
Be an entryway for genetics to it.
Yeah, I think you could spend a few lifetimes working with various Japanese maples.
We have a potluck. I mean, our breeding is all based on mother plant and finding as much genetics as we can. But Talon had a pretty cool thing he was working on of Acer pseudosboldianums before he retired, and we've kind of inherited his projects on this. So there's some really cool reds and different Pseudoseboldianum seedlings that he was developing that I think will be fun in the future in a zone 4 possibly, maybe.
Yeah, that'd be great to push cold hardiness. Talking about projects that were a complete failure, one project I did attempt at one point was crossing Acer griseum with Acer saccharum, and it's been reported in the literature that cross is possible. And I think we tried a few thousand crosses and never got a single seedling.
Oh, goodness.
From it. So, but we are working on Acer tetericum and are close to having some releases on that in our projects for developing seedless forms of plants.
Very
cool. And so we've got some top selections now of Acer ganala / tetericum that are triploids and seedless, really good fall color that we're close to releasing. So
that's awesome. That'll be exciting stuff. Yeah. We'll have to talk some more about that.
Japonicums, we'll have to think about.
We just need more. It's just a limited section. We did if we did a podcast on Japonicums, I think we might could count to 40 if we're counting Masayoshi stuff in Japan and getting tricky. But it's a market that the customers love. They love Acer Japonicum, but there's not as much diversity as I'd like there.
Mm-hmm.
Cool place. I know at one point you talked to me possibly about at one point you were either developing or you had a lace leaf that was coral bark.
Oh, we were interested in doing what is the Oregon vine maple?
Acer circinatum.
Circinatum. We were interested in doing circinatum bipalmatum crosses, and I'm not convinced that we were successful at that.
Interesting.
But trying to get some of the, sometimes you can stack traits from different parents and accentuate them. And so if you can bring in different genes, different traits for good stem color, sometimes you can amplify that. So that was sort of our thought.
That's super interesting.
That's interesting. That's often one of the ways I thought there might be a entryway into, having, more coral bark selections is through something like Pacific Fire that is already a coral bark and is a circinatum likely hybrid to begin with.
Right.
Cool stuff. Endless possibilities. I really appreciate you hopping on here today and talking to us just a little bit about your lifetime of amazing plants. There's so many cool things. We could spend the next 4 hours going over plants you've developed. We'll break down all 64 in the extended cut. But it's like number one hits. I like to think about it like music. It's like those are like, these plants you have in your garden. It's crazy.
The evergreen dogwoods, leprechaun, little ruby.
We've offered leprechaun and little ruby several times. I love those.
Coming soon to a 10 at 10 Berberis Sunjoy Mini Maroon. I think we've just got some of those are about to be listing pretty soon as well. A Canomalus double take. I mean, there's a huge number of plants that we offer on Mr. Maple that you probably have in your garden, and they came from Dr. Tom Ranney's research right here. He's won so many breeders awards. It's hard to even mention them all because, I found a list and there's like 10 of them.
That's all of them.
And then my phone lost reception. I couldn't pull it up to actually read them. And I was like, man, but I was like shocked by how many different breeders awards you won. And to think, your love of plants may have, go back to some daffodils.
Oh, we love it. You go to other states and people are like, hey, no small task, but they want me to be the Tom Ranney of this state. And so that tells you a lot about your influence on the horticulture world at large. People, you go to different places, are like, oh, no small task. I just have to be like the grand champion at what I do. They just want me to be like him.
Or we're in Japan and they're like, oh, you're from North Carolina, and we're like, yeah, we're 15 minutes away from the Mountain Horticulture Research Station, and they're like, oh, we know exactly where that's at.
We've been there,
and we're like, this is on your next trip.
Those are great connections.
We often, when we're traveling abroad, tell people how close we are in relation to the Mountain Horticulture Research Station here, where you work, because they know exactly where this place is because you've put this place on the map from all your introductions.
Well, I actually think it's the other way around. We're going to start working on riding your coattails because it's impressive all you have done and how successful Mr. Maple has been and Buckholtz Nursery.
I appreciate it. We've been blessed. I mean, you've been shopping with us since we were at the tailgate market, so I appreciate you jumping on here. You've seen us when we were our smallest, so it's fun.
I've got lots of your plants in my yard. Stories, so we are just starting a new 5-acre garden at home, and so we planted actually a lot of your plants there.
Oh, nice.
You did some pickups after, Matt and I sort of started being more hands off on a lot of the pickups. And I didn't realize that you had done some of your purchases because we weren't even, we didn't even know
local pickups. So we're like, hey, look, Tom's been getting a bunch of plants. We were talking about last week. We're like, man, we need to twist his arm when he comes by and go say hello. I keep missing him.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you hopping on here today, though. And it's one of the fun things to kind of show a lot of our people a part of horticulture they may never see. And obviously cater to a lot of collectors. And this is one of the guys behind a lot of the plants you have in your garden. So it's just fun to have you on here today and kind of show another side of horticulture to all of our customers as well. So I appreciate that.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Well,
Great chatting with you.
Y'all, thanks to Dr. Tom Ranney. You can often see him on Facebook. You can often find him there as well. He's introducing plants through so many different nurseries across the world, really. Because
go to a garden center.
Go to a garden center. You'll see his plant. You'll see his album of work right there. Thank you so much for jumping in today. Y'all, make sure that if you're following us on a podcast platform, make sure to go give us a 5-star rating. Helps more people see us. Check us out on YouTube. We do have a video component to this as well. And always remember to shop on MrMaple.com.
Take care.
God bless.
Have a great day.
Thanks.